Late last year, we released Tailscale Services, a way to give logical resources in your network their own virtual Tailscale IP and port. That meant a service was no longer tied to just one machine. It could now point at one node or multiple nodes, or even move between nodes over time without changing the magic DNS name that your clients had to use. Now, if that sounds a little bit like a load balancer, you're sort of in the right ballpark. Because in practice, Tailscale Services can replace a lot of the traditional or cloud load balancer infrastructure that people normally reach for, especially inside your private Tailnet network. In the original announcement video though, I promised a follow-up on using Tailscale Services with Docker. And this video is that follow-up. Today, I'm going to show you DockTail. This is a community project I've been using a lot recently. Now, DockTail watches your Docker containers. It has to mount the Docker socket to do that. It reads the labels you apply to them and then uses those labels to automatically expose matching containers as native Tailscale services. It's kind of a bit like what Traefik does in the Docker ecosystem, if you're familiar with that. But the nice bit about DockTail is your app containers don't need to publish ports on the host anymore, and DockTail can just proxy straight into their Docker network IPs, and this gives each app a clean and stable Tailscale service address, even if the container underneath moves to a different host later on. So I know some of you are excited already at the prospect of no more sidecars needed. The basic idea is quite simple though. Docker labels in and Tailscale services out. As I said in the intro, DockTail is a community application, and I'll put a link to it in the description down below. Now, one thing I want to draw your attention to is this helpful comparison table they have in their README description. It kind of compares DockTail to TSD proxy and several of the other options available in this space. In fact, I put a link to the video I made about TSD proxy last year up in that corner for you. But the main thing really is that DockTail supports Tailscale services natively, which is a bit of a departure from the other options. Now, along with that link to the project's GitHub, I'm also going to put a link to my GitHub, or the Tailscale Dev GitHub here, with all of the resources and kind of code snippets that we use in all of these videos. Essentially today, we're going to use one big Docker Compose file to spin up 3 applications and then also configure our ACLs. It's pretty straightforward to configure, but we are going to have to generate a couple of secrets. In terms of prerequisites for today's video, you're going to want some kind of probably a Linux host running Docker and Tailscale. I already have one set up over here that's got Docker installed along with Tailscale. So if I do a Tailscale status, you can see this node, the actual host, the VM host, is already logged into my Tailnet. And I've also got Docker installed as well. So with that out of the way, it's really straightforward. I'm going to do a make dir and then containers and change into that directory and then create a compose.yaml file into which I am simply going to paste the contents of this file right here. And there we go. Now, a couple of things to be aware of. We have to create a couple of environment variable secrets in order for DockTail to have the permissions to do what it needs to do and create the things it needs to create. So what we need to do now is create a .env file. So we're in the same directory as the compose.yaml file on the remote virtual machine, and we'll do a .env. Then you'll want to head over to settings in your admin console and click on trust credentials and generate a new credential. This is where we're going to generate the permission for DockTail to read and write Tailscale services and modify their properties. Now, in order to do this, we actually have to add a tag, which we haven't yet done. So in our code snippets here, you'll see this file called aclservices.json. We have to add a couple of things into our Tailscale policy file in order for this to work. So first of all, let's copy these 4 lines here called tag owners of DockTail host and DockTail service, and go back to our admin console, go to access controls, find a suitable spot in your JSON file and add that there. Now, whilst we're in this file, it's like every car guy's worst sentence, isn't it? It's while I'm in there, we're also going to add auto approvers as well. And I like to, for some reason, I just put this at the end. I don't really know why I put things in this order, but over time I've kind of developed this way of working. So anyway, copy and paste these couple of things into your ACLs file, and you'll notice that auto approvers, this is going to be really slick in a minute. This is going to allow it so that we don't have to manually approve everything that DockTail is doing. It just automatically creates and manages the services for us. And then the tags are how we assign ownership to these various nodes within our tailnet. So with that done, we can now generate our credential, our trust credential. So we can go over here, click on new credential, click on continue, and we will give it the services scope, and we can give it the DockTail service tag. So in other words, every service that gets created by this token will automatically have that DockTail service tag applied to it. It's an arbitrary name we gave it. I mean, you can call it whatever you want, but I wanted to make it obvious for this video what we wanted to do. And then the other thing we've got to do is give it, under devices, we've got to give it read and write scope for core devices as well. So let's generate that credential, and you'll see we get two things here. We get the client ID and the client secret. Now, back in our env file from a couple of minutes ago, so just to remind you, we have the compose.yaml file right here, and we have the .env file. So we have to create a file, .env, in this directory, basically containing these secret values here. So we don't store the secrets in clear text in the compose file, we store them in the .env file next to the compose file. I hope you're as confused as I am whilst I'm explaining that. But essentially, it looks like this. We create the .env file, we paste this in, we get the value from over here, we paste it in. I know I'm going quickly, but you know, it's one of those things. And then what we can do is we can do a YYP to yank yank pull, and then we can change this to secret, and then we can get the secret value from over here, and that really is it. So by the end of it, you should have a .env file. In fact, let me list the files out this way. You should have two files in this directory. You should have a .env file, and you should have a compose.yaml file in this directory. The .env file should contain two values only, and these are like a username and password. Treat them with care, treat them with respect. Don't post them or commit them to Git or anything like that. Although if you do, GitHub secret scanning will pick up that it's a known token and revoke them for you and stuff like that. In fact, I have a video about that up here somewhere, I think, as well. Essentially, treat them like a username and password. Don't hand them out like candy. But essentially, we should now just be able to do a Docker Compose up, and it will pull down the images that we want, and it will create the services, and if we've done everything right, it'll just work. Famous last words for a demo, I know, but then to monitor the logs, I'll do a Docker Compose logs -f, and we'll see a bunch of stuff scrolling by. But the important thing is now, if we go back to our admin console and look for services, we should see any moment that the services have been added to our admin console. Except they haven't, because we've missed one very important step. Our node, in fact, if we look at the logs here in DockTail, it tells us, look, our Tailscale node is not tagged, and services requires the host node to be tagged as well. So that's an easy fix. We can go back to our admin console, and we click on the three-dot menu and edit ACL tags. In the drop-down, we now select DockTail host. Then we'll go back to, I've just broken my SSH in the process, which means I need to update my ACLs. You see how all this stuff just happens in real time? So the destination, I now have a new tag here of tag, was it DockTail host? Because the ownership, so to explain what happened there, the ownership of the node changed from being owned by my user to now being owned by that tag. And the SSH policy meant that that was no longer allowed within policy. So it revoked my access, look, in real time via SSH, because I was logged in through Tailscale SSH. So if you update your policy in real time, it will lock you out of where you are. And now if I do SSH fake NAS, because I've updated the policy, we should be good to go. So we'll change back into my containers directory, and I'll do a Docker Compose restart. So in theory now, this is tempting fate, isn't it? But in theory now, we should be able to go back to our services page and see that some of the services are indeed now coming online. Files is there, PDFs is there, tools is there. And so if we visit this URL, now remember the first time when you visit a new URL, because we're talking to Let's Encrypt in the backend, it can take 30 seconds for that kind of Acme client stuff to happen behind the scenes. So you might want to just hit the URL once, close the tab, wait a second whilst that Let's Encrypt dance happens, and then load the page. Otherwise, you might end up with a TLS certificate error. But essentially, that's it, right? We've just managed to use DockTail to configure a native Tailscale service. Lots of stuff going on behind the scenes. So let's do a quick recap of all the little bits that we needed here. So under settings, we had to create a trust credential with the following scopes. Click on edit for the token that we generated. And I want to show you that it was services, read and write. And remember, we had to have a specific tag, the service tag, not the host tag. And then under devices, we had to have the read and write scope as well. Then you've also got a couple of things in your ACL files to look for as well. So we added these tag owners right here, these 4 lines. And again, this is all in the code snippets, right? So this is all in GitHub for you, just a couple of copy and pastes, hopefully. We had to enable tag owners. We also had to make sure that the Docker host, or the VM or whatever you're using to run DockTail on, is also a tagged Tailscale node. And remember, I locked myself out of SSH, so I had to add this tag here for DockTail host as well. And then auto approvers means that I'm not manually approving services as they get added to the admin console. And then essentially, I can now have, I can move this PDF container to a completely different host, and it will just keep working until the end of time. Of course, it's doing the Let's Encrypt thing right now, where it's having a little think about the world. But hopefully today's video gives you a little taste of what Tailscale Services can do for you, and specifically what DockTail can do for you. For those of you that have been wanting to use Tailscale Services with Docker for some time now, this is the way to do it, right? I know it's a community project. It's not officially a Tailscale blah blah blah, and products would be very upset with me if I said it was, but it's a wonderful, DockTail is a wonderful implementation, and I'm really glad that we were able to feature it on the channel today. All that's left for me to say is thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I've been Alex from Tailscale.